Take a moment to sense the space around you. You might be sitting in a chair, feeling the pressure against your body, or holding a phone, your fingertips touching the cool glass. In your eyes, the world has boundaries. The lines extending from the corners of the room, the silhouettes of buildings outside the window, and the void you can reach out and touch. In your understanding, this is just how the world is. Length, width, height, plus a river that pushes you along. Time. But do you ever feel a strange sense of displacement? Like when you stare at yourself in the mirror for too long, and suddenly that face feels like a stranger's. Or when you fall into an irrepressible anxiety, and you feel like your consciousness is a small person trapped in a narrow box, desperately pounding against the walls of your flesh with nowhere to escape. This feeling isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. In fact, it reveals one of the most brutal and fascinating truths about being human. Your consciousness may be far taller than your physical body. The reason you feel pain is that your soul is trying to push open a door, but your biological hardware, this three-dimensional shell evolved over millions of years, simply wasn't built with the hands to turn the knob. Today, we aren't going to talk about complex mathematical formulas. We're going to talk about you, about why we are trapped in this three-dimensional prison, and how the fifth dimension, which you cannot perceive, is secretly pulling the strings of your every anxious night. Let's go back to the starting point where your hardware specifications were decided. Imagine a creature living on a two-dimensional plane. For it, the world consists only of left and right, forward and back. If a three-dimensional sphere were to pass through its plane, it wouldn't see a sphere. It would see a circle that suddenly appears, grows, shrinks, and finally vanishes into thin air. It would think this was a miracle or a terrifying supernatural event, because its brain has no concept of up or down. Humans are essentially those flatland creatures, living in a higher dimensional world. Neurobiologists will tell you that our cerebral cortex underwent a radical downsizing during evolution. Millions of years ago on the open savannah, your ancestors didn't need to perceive five-dimensional space. What they needed was to see if the patterns in the grass belonged to a predator, or to judge if a thrown stone would hit its mark. Perceiving the fifth dimension requires an immense neural network, which means massive energy consumption. In an era of food scarcity, a primitive human trying to understand supersymmetry would have starved to death because their brain burned through calories too fast. Or they would have been devoured because they were half a second too slow while contemplating dimensional projections. So, evolution acted like a stingy editor, cutting out all the redundant sensory dimensions. It installed a highly efficient but extremely simple piece of underlying software in your brain. This software is hard-coded to process only the information necessary for survival. The colors you see, the sounds you hear, the space you perceive, none of them are the true reality of the world. They are just a custom-made set of virtual reality goggles created by evolution to keep you alive. Beyond these goggles lies a magnificent multi-dimensional universe, and you are locked within this cage called the senses. This mismatch between hardware and reality has evolved into a common modern ailment: chronic anxiety. You'll notice that the suffering of modern people is often extremely abstract. We no longer worry about being eaten by wild beasts, but we worry about the future, about social judgment, about possibilities we can't see or touch. From a physics perspective, if you could stand in the fifth dimension, you would see that time is no longer a flowing river, but a static entity, like a mountain range. You could see your birth and your death existing simultaneously, like 2 points on a map. But because our biological structure is three-dimensional, we are forced to perceive time as a series of slices. We can't see the whole picture, so we fear the unknown. When you lie in bed wondering, what if I had chosen a different job? Your consciousness is actually trying to cross dimensional boundaries to observe those parallel possibilities. But your three-dimensional brain cannot handle that complexity. It can only translate this cross-dimensional attempt into one emotion: anxiety. It's like trying to run ultra-high-definition software on a black-and-white monitor from 20 years ago. The monitor won't show the picture. It will only smoke, overheat, and make a piercing noise. Your anxiety is the smoke from your brain. It's a reminder that you are trying to process information that your biological hardware is simply not equipped to handle. So, as creatures trapped in a three-dimensional structure, what can we do? Since we can't perform surgery to give ourselves five-dimensional brains, how can we find a moment of freedom in this narrow dimension? Here are some suggestions based on neuroscience and cognitive psychology. They are practical and effective, not just empty comforts. First, cool down your alarm system. Now that you know your anxiety is often just the overheating noise of a 3D brain processing high-dimensional information, the next time you fall into an emotional black hole, try cognitive reframing. Don't say, "I'm having a breakdown." Tell yourself, "My old system is trying to process a pattern it doesn't understand. This is just normal hardware overheating." The mere act of naming can activate your rational brain and dampen the overactive emotional centers. Second, use physical anchors. Our brains may not perceive high dimensions, but they are incredibly sensitive to three-dimensional physical feedback. When you feel your consciousness spinning in the void of the future or the past, when you are trying to cross dimensions, forcefully pull your attention back to your 3D physical sensations. Feel the weight of your feet pressing against the ground. Count the rise and fall of your abdomen as you breathe. This essentially downgrades the overloaded CPU from high-dimensional simulation back to basic physical operation, giving the brain a chance to rest. Finally, and most importantly, accepting your limitations is true freedom. You must understand that human greatness doesn't come from being able to see everything. It comes from the fact that even while trapped in such a simple biological structure, we have used mathematics, art, and imagination to deduce a five-dimensional world we can never actually see. If you suffer because you cannot control the future, remember, you can't control it because you are merely a traveler walking through a three-dimensional world. It is normal that you cannot see the shape of the entire mountain. You don't need to feel ashamed or inadequate for it. If you feel like you just can't reach that level of detachment, if the walls of your mind still feel heavy enough to suffocate you, then I suggest a simpler exercise. Create a low-dimensional moment. Give yourself 10 minutes every day. Turn off your phone. Reject all abstract information. Go do something purely physical. Wash the dishes, do a puzzle, prune a plant, or just stare at a cloud. In those 10 minutes, retreat back into the most primitive, simplest three-dimensional world. You will find that when you stop trying to understand everything, this current slice of time becomes incredibly clear and gentle. Your life is like a movie playing on a three-dimensional screen. Although you cannot jump out of the screen, you can decide whether to stare at the pixels with eyes of pain or to watch with curiosity, enjoying this magnificent performance about the beauty of limitation. You cannot perceive the fifth dimension, but that doesn't stop you from being in the middle of a miracle right now.